In this lecture, we are going to talk about project management. There are many aspects of project management that we have to be made aware of. First, we're going to look at what a project actually is. Then we're going to look at what kind of pieces allow us to manage a project. We're going to look at the constraints that govern what we can and cannot do in projects. We're going to look at some tools that exist to help us create successful projects. And finally, we're going to talk about an area known as Agile Project Management, which is a unique philosophy that has recently gotten some headway in developing new project techniques. So first, when we're talking about projects, what we're talking about is a unique one-time operational effort. We are not talking about day-to-day tasks that you might do on a normal basis at your work. What we're talking about are big projects that might have long time frames so that we are forced to actually spend some time analyzing the way it works, the way we're developing it, and eventually construct some sort of end-of-the-user product that is based entirely on what the project is supposed to be representing. The projects themselves, because of this extreme nature of control, have their own dedicated process, which is entirely outside of any sort of design process or any sort of scientific process. The first step, usually outside of our control, is project initiation. This is where the decision makers of a company decide that something needs to be fixed and a project needs to be utilized to actually fix it. Once they've put together the basic understanding of what needs to be done, they then begin planning and designing the overall project of itself. They usually bring on individuals known as project leaders or project managers, and they talk about what actually needs to be done during the project. They then execute the tasks by bringing on their own team. All the while, the project manager or any leader within the team is responsible for monitoring and controlling the project. Otherwise, projects can become out of control and we can lose track of time. Once the project is completed, akin to the teamwork process of what is considered adjourning, we have to finish the project. We close it out so that the individuals that were brought on can begin working on other projects. Otherwise, they might work on a project indefinitely, which is not the point of a project because projects are closed time, one-time operational unique efforts. Projects themselves are typically managed based on the way the team is constructed. We first need to put a team together, and they're made up of members that come from all over the business. They can be multidisciplinary, they can be cross-functional, they can be interdepartmental. Essentially, anyone that brings some sort of expertise into the project that you need, you bring them on. You might be bringing on human resource representatives to work on a software development project. You might be bringing on an industrial engineer to work on a software developing project. Or you might be bringing on a software developer to work on an assembly line project. It just depends on the context of the project. These decisions are typically made by team leaders or project managers. They are the ones that are responsible for monitoring, controlling, making sure the team is getting along, essentially the in-charge boss of all of it. Sometimes they are considered to be one of the most important team members because without the project manager, we begin to fumble. You end up having team members that do whatever they want to do instead of focusing on what the team needs as a whole. So we definitely need project managers that are responsible for managing the project while we have project team members who are responsible for executing the tasks within the project itself. When we're looking at projects, we cannot spend an infinite amount of time. We cannot spend an infinite amount of money, and we can't do just whatever we want. There are some specific constraints that must be met. The first, and generally considered the most important constraint, is the scope. This is also sometimes classified as a customer satisfaction constraint. We need to make sure we are meeting what the customer, which might be internal, if it's within our company, it might be external, if it's an outside customer or end user. We have to make sure we are meeting what they need. They will list out their requirements. We make sure we meet those requirements. That constrains our project. It tells us what we must have against what we might want to have, and we need to balance those things. The second most common constraint is cost. We do not have an infinite amount of money. Businesses are in the business of making money. So we want to make sure we are spending as little money as possible, and so businesses will typically limit how much you can and cannot spend in the form of a budget. This is a cost constraint that we must be made aware of. The last one is the schedule, which essentially boils down to our availability of time. We do not have an infinite amount of time to do these projects. We are constrained maybe to 3 weeks, to 6 months, to a year. It depends on the scope and the cost of the project. All of these constraints play with each other. They're all interacting. If I have more time to spend, I generally am spending more money because I have employees that are getting paid during that time. If I have a wider amount of time, I can do more for the customer. If I have more money, I can do more for the customer. If I have less money, I can do less for the customer. So sometimes these are called a triple constraints or a golden triangle because they are all related. And smack dab in the middle is an area that is known as quality, because the overall quality of your project is determined by the cost, the schedule, and the scope. There are many different tools and different philosophies for approaching projects, but some tools that help us create consistent, successful projects are as follows. First, a project charter. Akin to the team charter, it essentially is a document that defines the deliverables and any sort of specific information that we need about the project. It always starts with the description, which states the overall project description. What it is the project is there to do. Why did we get together to form a team? Why do we need these individuals working on a project? The second one is actual objectives. What does it specifically need to do? This is usually driven entirely based on the customer requirements. We need to know what deliverables we're outputting. Is it a software tool? Is it a document? Is it some sort of internalized process? We need to make sure we have defined these deliverables clearly so that when we are done with the project, we know we've met everything. We also need to know the availability of time. This is usually called duration. We need to know what customers are involved. Who are our contacts? Who do I need to talk to make sure that we are meeting everything that is being done? We need to be concerned about stakeholders, which are the individuals that worry about what this is going to do for them financially. Who holds stake in the success of this project? We need to be worried about team members. So in our charter, we need to establish what kinds of team members we need. Do we need developers? Do we need analysts? Do we need human resource representatives? Do we need research specialists? And we also need to define the types of roles that they will be filling. And then finally, there's this catch-all called planning information, which is just like everything else you probably haven't considered. Stuff like who is in charge of the team? Do we have extra contacts outside of the company that might not be directly considered customers? Who else might be involved or what else might be involved? So this planning information section can kind of catch a lot of stuff that the other topics don't really cover. Once we've determined the charter, we have to begin defining the tasks. This is daunting. We have a bunch of tasks that we know about, and then there's also tasks that we have yet to discover. Sometimes as you're working on a project, you get to a point where you realize, I forgot about something, and I need to have a set of tasks to fix whatever I forgot about. That's perfectly okay. We just need to make sure we're hitting the main sections like the planning process. We must spend time to plan. We don't just dive right in. The design process, we have meetings about how to design it. We'll have meetings about who does what and how everyone is going to interact. Then we spend the time physically building whatever the solution happens to be. This takes a lot of time. If it's code development, this is the physical process of developing code. If it's the production of a manufacturing line, this is the physical process of building the manufacturing line. Then we also have to look at the last step, which is the delivery part. How do we get it to the customer? How do we make sure they are happy with it? That will take time. We need to approximately define all these tasks to the best of our abilities. As you gain more experience in an industry, you begin getting better estimates about the tasks that need to be executed and how long they might take, which is the third step of developing a schedule. Given all of your tasks, you estimate how long you expect each task to take. Again, this does not have to be exact. It's not even expected to be exact. You just need to be within reason of what seems appropriate for the project at hand. Hopefully, all of your times don't equal more than your actual project duration in terms of like the due date. But in most cases, there's a way to layer and to fix everything so that we can maybe be working on stuff simultaneously. When developing a schedule, it is very important to identify an area known as milestones. These are generally considered important stopping points that allow us to pause the project and evaluate where we're at right now. If I take all of my team and I say every Friday at 3 p.m. we are stopping and we are going to talk about where we're at, we're going to make sure everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing. This will give us a way to evaluate the internal quality of our project as well as make sure we are meeting our customer requirements as we move through the development of the project. Now, scheduling in and of itself is its own field. There are a lot of different tools that exist to help us schedule. The very first one that people tend to use is the work breakdown structure, or called WBS charts. Work breakdown structures merely show a hierarchy of tasks and their relationship to one another. If you think about building a house, I can't install a roof before I've poured the concrete foundation. There is a precedence or order of operation that we must meet, and work breakdown structures allow us to take all the tasks that we are aware of and break them down into some sort of hierarchy of execution. That way, we know that at the very bottom, if it's not done, everything above it can't possibly be done. And so work breakdown structures allow us to figure out what has been done and what is left to be done to figure out whether or not we're getting close to finishing our project. Another more common way is through network diagrams. This essentially says the exact same information, but in the form of a network diagram, meaning there is precedence given by arrows, there is a natural hierarchy, but it might be disguised by the structure of the diagram itself, but it allows us to itemize out all our tasks, the order of operations, and in most cases, we can put time into it, which means the duration of the tasks can be recorded. If I know the order of operation and the amount of time each task takes, I can construct something called a critical path. A critical path is the series of tasks that define the longest duration across the whole project. This is the path that defines the length of the project. It's essentially saying all of these tasks are critical, and if any of those tasks becomes late, then the entire project is delayed. So identifying the critical path is extremely important from a scheduling perspective because it will tell me immediately if I am within my time constraint. If I am beyond my time constraint with my critical path, then I need to go back and readjust my schedule times, or I need to consider removing tasks that might be superfluous or are not adding value to my overall project. The most common way of showing your schedule, once you've put it all together, is a Gantt chart. These are very popular in management and they're very popular in engineering, primarily because it stores a lot of information in a nice, concise graph. They are always bar graphs. On the left-hand side, we list all of our tasks, all the tasks that we have come up with so far. In the top, we list whatever time frame we're looking at. It could be per day, it could be per month, it could be per 6 weeks, per 4 hours. It depends on the duration of the project. Then we use bars to represent the duration of time that each of these tasks take. In more advanced Gantt charts, we essentially change colors to signify what has been done, what hasn't been done, maybe what is late. And in the example on the slide, the red bars represent the critical path. This is the path of tasks that will make and define my project length. You'll notice that if any of these critical activities are shifted to the right, then the entire project is shifted to the right because of the precedence. So Gantt charts, not only being a useful way of showing a schedule, is also a useful analytical tool to determine the critical path and what kind of activities can and cannot be delayed. Any activity that isn't on the critical path can be delayed, meaning if you have understaffing for employees, you can actually move it a little bit and say, we're going to wait on doing that. That's the point of doing Gantt charts. There are many software tools that create Gantt charts. Visio does them, Excel has a template, Microsoft Project will do them, and anytime you work on a project, you will definitely be seeing a Gantt chart. Once I've established the schedule, I need to make sure I'm managing my costs. I have a competing costs here. First, I have my capital costs, which is the money I spend to initiate things. If I need to buy a new server, if I need to buy some sort of software tool, if I need to bring a new employee on board, there is an onboarding capital expense. The other side is my operational expenses. How much money I spend to keep my people employed, how much money I spend maybe keep them happy, am I having to buy things intermittently? I need to make sure that I'm meeting my budget. It is important, more so in most businesses, to not exceed your budget, because the second you exceed your budget, they begin breathing down your neck. The finance department says, what are you doing? So make sure you're managing your costs appropriately. 5, you need to distribute your team. You have roles, you have qualified team members. You need to assign those team members to their roles. Hopefully we can distribute the work evenly. It's not always possible, but in most cases we try to spread it out, and we also give them an opportunity to learn each other's tasks or processes in a form of cross-training. This only brings the entire team up as a whole, but distribute your team members appropriately based on their expertise and their background. Number 6 is we have to document. I cannot emphasize documentation enough. It's important that you're documenting throughout the project process so that you don't do double work. We don't want to have extra work put on our plate because we forgot that we did something in the past. So in most cases, I like to set up milestones to pause and update my documentation. I've worked at places where I literally stop the entire team and we spend 2 hours updating documentation. They're not allowed to work on anything except for updating documentation. The last one is the team roles themselves. This is different from their areas of expertise and their tasks. Sometimes we might not have a project manager who's always around. We need to have some sort of coordinator, some sort of leader who will fulfill that position when they're not around. We might need someone who's responsible for procuring material. We might need someone who's responsible for keeping track of the money. We might need someone who's responsible for updating the schedule. We need to identify those roles so that everyone involved know what's going on and can actually keep track of the project and help control it so that the project manager isn't forced to do absolutely everything. Now, the last little piece is on project management philosophy called Agile. Agile is relatively new within the past 15 or 20 years, and it is this area that is dedicated to being flexible. A lot of project management feels rigid because we make a huge attempt to estimate times, estimate activities, and the idea is that as we spend more time in that, we actually produce a better outcome. But in reality, things change. Employees quit, we bring on new employees, maybe the project manager is deciding to leave, maybe customers have changed their mind, maybe the business has decided there's not enough money to spend in this area, so changes happen. Because of that, Agile project management has become popular. It doesn't necessarily look at the rigid structure of project management. It considers the interactions you have with each other as well as the customers far more important to creating a successful project. It does concern itself with meeting customer requirements on time, but it doesn't focus on whether or not on time is strict. It gives you a little bit of playtime. You can manipulate deadlines and you can play with when stuff is actually being turned in. It ends up creating a great environment of collaboration, not only between your team, but also between the customer, because there's a lot of back and forth communication because you want to make sure that as your customers' needs change over time, you are adapting your project to meet those customers' needs. Ultimately, it ends up prizing flexibility to changes over the rigor nature of normal projects, which is why Agile project management is much more entertained in this day and age, primarily because we have flexibility and we know things change. The old school project management methodologies still work, but it restricts us from being able to respond to customer changes and everything that actually happens in the business world. Agile meets business operation requirements better from a standpoint of flexibility, from a standpoint of spending money, and from a standpoint of meeting your customer requirements. Thank you for watching.